All right, folks, let's talk about cosmic law. Quick spaces just to celebrate us going over 9,000 followers. Now, I understand that not all followers are supporters, but it's a symbolic number or whatever. Um, and perhaps we can sway some minds here with a quick discussion on cosmic law. And again, like we always say, you're not going to learn this stuff from a book. So listen carefully. Pay mind. Um, Give to us your attention, right? There exists such a thing as I'm just gonna get right into it because you know it's better. Anyway, there is such a thing as universal doctrine. Okay, if you want to understand why the world is the way it is, why it functions the way it functions, there is a thing called universal doctrine, and the the highest law that supersedes all other laws of cosmic law, and we call it cosmic because it's grandiose, right? Its scale is grandiose, means it covers the whole of creation, at least our plate of creation. So the highest law is one of creation, the law of creation. And it says any act of innocent creation cannot be opposed. Okay? Learn that, like really learn that, the meaning behind that. So any act of innocent creation cannot be opposed. Why? Because God is creation itself, right? And because God is creation itself, um, for creation to have any sort of fundamental function, it falls into the law of choice, which is basically the meaning of its existence, for it to cast choices and for it to have the capacity to cast choices, and then to see the end result of these choices, right? This is functionally, if you were to describe your life experience here on this earth, that's what you would get. Like the most objective and truthful understanding of what your life's journey here on this earth is, well, you are going to be given the capacity and the ability and the opportunity to cast a number of choices. And then you will also be given the feedback loop, so to speak, the ability to see and feel and experience for yourself the end result of these choices, right? So, because this is so, we're going to go through a very basic but fundamentally life altering teaching here. Okay. Whoever understands this, like many people can't even understand this concept, which is fine. They're not ready for it. But whoever understands this concept, sort of like they receive the keys to the universe, so to speak, right? So the concept is such very simple. Any act of innocent creation cannot be opposed. And whoever directly breaks this law, therefore, will most likely inherit incredible wrath. Whatever is in opposition to something, though, can and will be opposed. So remember that. This is why we teach the following, that one should focus on creating, building new ways of life, new temples that others can choose to become empowered by. The important element here is intention. So if you focus on direct and continued opposition, right? So let's say if you directly wish to go and oppose things you don't like in this world, right? I don't like that football is popular. Okay. Now, if I go outside on the street and start chanting, I hate football, football is a crappy sport, my stance, it comes into direct opposition with what is, and it can, so it is permitted to be opposed, so it can be opposed. All right, this is on a, let's say, even on a quantum level. Okay, the very idea, the very act, the very fact that I am doing what I am doing meaning coming into opposition with a thing that is already established in the quantum field, it makes me, right, open to also becoming opposed. Do you understand this concept? Okay. If you do, follow me. Like, follow me here. Like, bear with me for a little while. So, if I focus on direct and continued opposition, I cannot remain divinely guided and protected because I have entered. So I have abandoned my place of divine protection, and I have entered into a realm of opposition. Right. So I magnetize those things. Now, the only exception to this is denunciation. Okay. This is why even the most enlightened of masters, spiritual masters, will teach that to expose evil and wrongdoing, or what you feel is wrongdoing, if you are clearly intentioned, if you expose it, that is not the same as opposing it, because telling the truth is not opposition, it is informational exchange. So if I say football is a crappy sport, right? Someone has the capacity and the ability and the cosmic permission to come in and tell me, no, you're an idiot. Football is a great sport. What are you talking about? Right? Now, scale that up to higher modalities of violence, just for a better example, if you want it, like for a darker example or bleaker example. But now, if I go and say football, as long as it's true, by the way, factually, if I say, well, football is, in my mind, a rather degenerate sport because it negatively affects the development of the youth, right? Now, if someone comes and opposes me in a violent manner because of this, they will inherit great wrath. Now, they can tell me their opinion, right? They can say, well, you know what? I think you're wrong, and this and that reason and argument is why I think you're wrong. That's totally fine, right? That's philosophizing, that's ideation. But the moment they become an opposing force, they are going to inherit great wrath. Now, why do we make this distinction? Why is it important? Because right now we are in a state of collective confusion. And we're in a state of collective violence that is unheard of in recent history, right? And we have a very violent history. Keep in mind, the human race, the the history of the human race is mostly, like, 95% incredibly violent. And compared to that, right now, a very large proponent of, I don't know, whatever you interface with on a daily basis is a call to direct opposition. So, is this unjust? No, it is not. It is righteously, like, it's righteous anger, right? But I also want to share with you the dangers of entrapping yourself within this. How do we make evil obsolete is the question of this thesis, right? And I'm going to explain to you how that is achieved and how most people think is achieved, which is wrong. Now, we talked about denunciation, we talked about intention, and we talked about the highest universal law, which is any act of innocent creation cannot be opposed, right? This is why deception has been needed for wrongdoing for all these years and millennia, by the way. Um, Direct opposition inherits the wrath of gods. Um, but something like deception, right, or temptation, right, is a different element because you, through temptation, you become a co-conspirator of evil, so to speak. You don't, while you still remain the architect of said evil, you become a co-conspirator in it. So the wrath inherited from this is rather delayed. It is not immediate. Get it? It takes a longer amount of time, right? because we live in a time based reality for it to become manifest. Now, the more people who are in on it on a quantum energetic level, the greater the energetic charge on a quantum level. And because the charge is greater, then the delay in time through which the feedback effect manifests is also increased and elevated, right? So the more people who fall into a specific type of deception, right? Their stories have to play out for the result of the deception to become finalized. Only after it is finalized can the feedback happen, right? So, if you punch someone, right, you have all the intention of punching someone. You're about to punch them. Your punch is in the air. It's going right in their direction. But will the feedback loop happen before you've punched them? Of course not. First, the punch has to land where it's going, right? For the feedback loop to activate, because the object that is being violated, which is in this case, it is the other person, the person you're punching, needs to become aware that it is being punched or has been punched. You understand what I'm saying? So the more people who join in on this sort of deal, it takes longer for the punch to land, so to speak, right? Like, just take my example. So anyway, because this is so, let's take an example situation. Like, for example, how do you destroy the existence of corrupt rulers? Let's say in the UK, right? It's some gruesome news that came out from the UK just recently, right? And people are, up in arms because of it, righteously so. By the way, I want to emphasize that. So how do most people feel they should make this obsolete? It's like, we don't want to have corrupt rulers anymore in the UK. Well, most people would say something like, "Well, bring back public hangings and bring back the death penalty." Again, direct opposition, right? And that same death penalty, I guarantee you, will be then used against them in a myriad of ways. Just watch and see. We've seen it 100 times. We've seen it 100 times, right? Because when you come into direct opposition with these things, right, you inherit the exact same thing. This is why, in the first place, the death penalty in civilized society was outlawed, not because it was used to punish wrongdoers, but because it was used disproportionately to punish the innocent. So if you give a governing party the ability to decide who is innocent and who is not, and then you also give it the ability to publicly hang that person, guess what's going to happen? Guess how many innocent people are going to suffer from this? And guess how many wrongdoers? Well, about 50-50. Is that, a trade-off you're willing to make? I'm not willing to make it, because it goes against another law, another cosmic law of the sanctity of life, right? Okay, let's, yeah, just bear with me here still. I'll get to the main point. So anyway, the same death penalty would be used against them. We know this is going to happen. So in truth, how you make evil disappear is not by directly opposing it, right? But by making it obsolete. What's the difference? Well, this means creation, the act of creation. Like we said, the act of creation is untouchable. Any sort of innocent act of creation is holy in the eyes of creation itself. Okay? Now, through building a new system and a new way of living, new legislation, new power structure, new moral and philosophical grounds and ideals where no such evil can possibly be permitted to exist, is how you make evil obsolete. Not through destroying it and burning it down, even though righteously, on an individual level, righteously, you feel like this is the means to achieve that goal, right? Again, like I said, many people just won't understand this. But if you're following me, just stick around a little bit further. So, when a society demands from the bottom up, by the way, the formation of leadership or a style of leadership or a group of people as its leadership that is impervious to corruption, the demand is this. That is exactly when and only when it will become manifest. But when a society demands and celebrates true righteousness from its individuals and its leaders, the unrighteous become unpopular. So, why is it today that we live in a world where the unrighteous are popular? Well, because unrighteousness is popular in our current societies, at least in the West. Again, not through this doesn't happen through mutual destruction, but through self empowerment. This change. The absence of evil is a symptom of enlightened action, right? Whereas passivity in the face of evil, indifference in the face of evil, is basically the permission of that evil. This is what you're seeing today. Make no mistake. This is not a civilization or a nation or whatever that is pacified by evil. It is a pacified civilization or a pacified society that is permissive of evil. There's a big difference. There's a big discrepancy between those two things. Okay. Now, you think you have corrupt rulers now? Well, I'll tell you this. I would tell you this. For each corrupt ruler that you have right now, let's say in the UK, you have 100 corrupt members of that same society. These are people living in inaction, total passivity, and cowardice. Look at the glacial pace at which virtue and righteousness is being demanded in real life right now. Basically non-existent. Right? We had one protest or something. Like I don't really watch the news, right? Much because well, it's a different country. I have my own issues, right? But from what I see is minimal. Okay, correct me on this if I'm wrong. So for each of your corrupted rulers, you have at least 1,000 corrupt members of your society. And where did these corrupt rulers come from? Are they not the result and symptom of your society? Right? Did they not establish themselves through climbing the ranks of the very society you've built? Right? And well, if someone comes along and look, if someone, there's always going to be someone who will, there's always going to be a devil, so to speak, in the bushes, right? And the devil in the bushes is going to come to you and say, "Hey, if you betray your whole family, I can give you $500,000." That's always going to happen, my friends. And the weakest link of that family or that society, right? Because righteousness and morality is not ingrained within them, right? Because they come from an immoral society will always accept that. Will always accept that deal. So this is what you're seeing right now. Externally, you have the pressure of the deal, and internally, you have something that's so corrupt, that's so innately just rotting from the inside out that even it doesn't believe that it deserves to exist anymore. Right? That's the problem. Or one of the problems. There's an external problem and there's a massive internal problem as well. So awareness, caution, strength, these are the elements that make evil obsolete. The moment you build a strong family circle, a society based on morality and righteousness, a lifestyle that educates your sons and daughters and empowers them and makes them strong and aware, not subservient cattle, but genuine agency is given to them, right? Is the moment you deliver your your family from bondage, right? Because evil to such degree cannot possibly exist in a society that has made its designs obsolete and it is not allowed to interfere directly. This is why deception, again, as a tool, is needed for evil to achieve its goals. So, how can any sort of criminal activity exist in a society that is aware of its dark intentions, denounces its plans, and makes it impossible for it to live, thrive, and to exist within its walls? Tell me. It can't. So, in this sense, according to cosmic law, going to war is only permitted against those who destroy innocent creation. And those always become destroyed. So, those who directly destroy innocent creation through means of deception and temptation, over time, their destiny is to become destroyed. That's the wrath they inherit, guaranteed. But guess what you inherit, right? When you step into direct opposition. Well, you inherit a worse world. That's what you inherit. So this is why it's very difficult to follow this teaching, right? Because this is the teaching that tells you, you have these terrible people in your city, in your neighborhood, right? And they're just trashing the neighborhood, right? And what you want to do is, I want to go and I want to burn their house down. Well, then they're also going to burn your house down, right? What you can do is regulate, and what you can do is demand standards. So if you say, we live in a neighborhood where throwing trash on the ground is not permitted, that's it, period. That's the standard. You either follow these rules or you get your ass kicked out. Who needs to demand this? Oh, the police should do something. Oh, the leaders should. But they're all corrupt. They're all spoiled. Who is then guilty of inaction? Is it the police who you know is corrupted? Is it the leaders who you know is corrupt and bought off? Or is it you? You sitting on the couch and doing nothing about it. So you're not demanding righteousness. You're not demanding it. So a very large component of change is the collective experience, the collective need to have righteous leadership, the collective need to have higher morals and ideas permeate your society. If that collective need doesn't exist on a tangible level, right? Then what is going to change? Nothing. So, how do you oppose this thing now where you're in the minority? Well, you have to create, and you have to be very smart about how you create, right? So instead of going and destroying things where my enemies can point their fingers at me and blame me for being a terrorist, right? I can go and I can create a movement. I can create a church. I can create charity. I can create all of these beautiful things in life that allow others to become inspired by it and also want to see more of this. They also want to live in a society where there's gentleness and care, and the family unit is strong, and we enjoy higher ideals. We enjoy having peaceful and harmonious living. We enjoy being physically empowered and strong. We enjoy being militarily responsible, but also empowered and strong, right? You want people to become invested in the higher ideal. Because if the higher ideal doesn't exist, as you can see right now, the degree of selfishness in the West has reached the point where, it doesn't touch me, so I don't care. I still have 10 more years to party, and then the world can go to hell. That's the general sentiment, right? It's like the general consensus sentiment that we see in the West, this degree of hedonism and selfishness, right? And these are the same people who support, through their passivity and inactivity, or inaction, I should say, the creation of such a world. Corrupt leaders are raised by societies like this. And of course, again, there will always be someone from the external world willing to, well, catch that opportunity. There will always be an opportunist who is going to exploit that. You understand? So understand that the only hope for the creation of a better world, right, is through creation itself, through creating, not destroying. It seems paradoxical, but that's how it is. Look, would you rather now make yourself impervious to being robbed, right? Or the opposite of that? So, for example, if I don't want to be robbed on the street, there will always be a robber on the street, regardless of what I do. There will always be some lost, confused soul who is playing currently the role of a thief. There will always be that. That's just ingrained within the design of Earth itself. How can I make myself impervious to being robbed? Well, I need to empower myself. I need to become smarter, more intelligent, right? I need to become the type of person, right, who is very difficult to rob. Now, if I'm weak and frail and meek and terrified, walking the streets just terrified, right? The thief sees me and comes like, wow, this is an easy person to rob. I'm going to go rob them, right? And now, if I live in a society where I am strong and empowered, and I'm not easy to rob at all because I know how to defend myself and I have boldness and bravery. If I see someone else being robbed, well, what do I do? Do I just go my own way? It's not me getting robbed. Who cares? That's the issue the West is having right now. That's the issue they're going through right now because people genuinely believe, right, that if they turn away and don't do anything, if they live in inaction, right, somehow their society is going to improve. But if you want to live in a society where there are no thieves and no robbers, then you must live in a society where people come together to assist and support one another. If I see someone being robbed, right? Again, like we said, innocent creation is being oppressed. Knightly code not only permits it, but demands it of you to intervene, right? If you see a person killing another person on the street, like if you see someone brutally attacking someone with a knife on the street, if you have to unfortunately slay that person to save the life of an innocent, right? You know where I'm going with it. We say, do not murder. You don't say anything about killing. If someone comes into your home and starts destroying your house, right? You have the both the capacity and the permission to stop them doing so. If someone comes and starts punching your wife in the gut, you can neutralize them. You can give them into the hands of justice, right? So inaction is no excuse. And even through a religious lens, right? There's a big push right now, like in terms of like opposing Christian ideology and people who do not read Christian teachings in scripture, right? People who are blind to the very religion they feel like they follow. They'll say, oh, well, like, I'm a hippie pacifist and I'm not going to do anything about anything. Who told you to be that? Which religious scripture told you to be that? You know? So it's demagoguery and mental gymnastics and self-manipulation. If you understand this principle, then you will forever remain in a quantum state of divine guidance and divine protection. You are untouchable. No weapon shall prosper against you. That's what it means. When you serve truth and righteousness and honesty, and you are well intentioned in your acts, you don't break cosmic law. But the moment you set out, so I don't like something, right? The moment you set out to directly oppose or oppress, guess what? Other people are now permitted to oppress you. So, creation, that's why creation is important. It's important to be creating systems today that empower you and your family and your nation and your friends and the people who are like minded to you, right? This is why I would, um, like, for example, if I take 10 of my friends, right, to go and I don't know, go to war against 10 of some other people that I don't like, right? Well, at least half of us are going to perish, and half of them are going to perish, probably, right? But if I go and find more friends, and if I have a 400 man strong army that is righteous and idealistic, Who would want to fight against that? No one. So you have to understand there's this rule, this quiet law that exists that is very difficult to follow. But if you actually learn to follow it, right, you will find yourself very empowered. And when you are empowered and you're aware that there are ill-intentioned people around you and there are corrupt, leaders and politicians, and there's like this whole system of whatever, all you have to do is build a society, or at least a community that is impervious to its effects. That's all you have to do. And you're untouchable. Because evil, like we said, is not permitted to directly interfere in the innocent act of creation. And those who are become destroyed. That's a universal law. This is why wrongdoing and evil, as we understand evil in this three-dimensional realm, always needs to use the tool of deception to get others to do the direct oppressing for them, right? So when you know this principle, it's easier for you to understand why I'm not equipping myself with, a torch and going to burn down the things that I don't like, but I'm rather building a system that makes all of the things that I don't like obsolete. I'm building a system, right? I'm building a commune. I'm having a group of friends that are immune to the effects of that corrupt system. And when the moment you have a beautiful island, guess what's going to happen? Everyone's going to want to be on that island. And people are going to love it. And they're going to leave whatever degenerate corrupt things that they were involved in, and they will want to come and become part of your beautiful island, right? But the prerequisite, like we said, the standard is that if you want to be part of this movement, then you have to idealize righteousness and higher ideals and spirituality and faith and the pursuit of self betterment and purity and cleanliness and so on and so forth. So all you have to do is create this power node almost, right? A place of power, or an ideal of power that people can naturally, not synthetically, not forcefully, naturally become magnetized by and naturally attracted to. And the moment you have that is the moment you beat the game of life. Like no one and nothing can oppress you ever again. So I've had to learn this lesson many times in my life. So I'm not just saying this out of nothing. Well, firstly, I like you received the wisdom of this. You received the knowledge of this through mystical means. But even outside of that, even if you just like study the logistics of your life, if you study the feedback loops that you've received in your life, you'll understand that this law stands, right? It's just how things are. So it's a degenerate thing to go and willfully spend your energy and your time and your creative juices, so to speak, to go and oppose or oppress some system or whatever that you don't like. How about you just make your own? How about you just empower your own? How about you create a power structure, again, that is impervious to those things? Well, for that, you need friends. And for that, you need friends who are like minded, who share your values. How about you go and build that? How about you become so strong and so attractive as a movement and an ideal? Because this is what evil in this world is incredibly good at. It's incredibly good at recruiting. It's incredibly good at networking. If you haven't noticed, it's incredibly good at swaying others to join them because they have all of these things that it can give them. It has the material goods, it has the funding, it has the resources, it has the sense of belonging almost. It is all it is incredibly competent in these things. it has this recruitment system that almost naturally happens because it says like, hey, you want to come over to Epstein Island? We got like the best food, the best private chefs, we got all the nice ladies, we have all of these cool things. You want to come over to Epstein Island real quick? Look what's on the other side. Is just this is a passive, crappy society where it's like working 9 to 5, like no higher ideals, no family, nothing. Look what's on the other side. Why would you be interested in that? Want to come over to Epstein Island? So it's incredibly attractive in a twisted sense, right? Now, what is the direct opposite of Epstein Island? It doesn't exist on this planet right now. The opposite of that doesn't. Imagine if there was a place called Wholesome Island. And it's just like this beautiful place that looks like a heavenly garden. It's just so beautiful, right? And everyone who arrives there is super warm and gentle. And I don't know, like there's a free massage for everyone or royal treatment for everyone. And people are very nice, right? There's a spiritual component to it. There's a blissful component to it. It's basically heaven on earth. Just like imagine that for a moment, right? So this beautiful society where everyone's incredibly healthy and happy and full of life and joy, and they're aware. It's not like they're in the Garden of Eden, so to speak, and they're like in this entranced state. No, no, no. They're fully aware, right? They're living out their highest being, highest potential. There is no such island on this earth. There is no such place. I'm sure like there's countries that live slightly more luxurious lives than maybe like yours and mine, but there is no such thing. And these things, we live in this sort of like darker timeline where these things only exist in idea. And now you might find yourself as you listen to me like describing this place, right? Well, why not? Why isn't there a place like that? Well, guess why? Because it is associated with material things. It is associated with money and funds. And those who have money and funds also probably have the selfishness to not use it in a communal sense. And we're going back to the sentiment that, again, we build societies and communities that cannot support righteous living and higher ideals. So we should not be surprised when the most filthy politicians and corrupt governing, governments arise from that same society we're part of. So if you want to build something like that, right? First you have to build it within the ether. You have to build it as an idea or of movement. This is where we are. So we're not at the stage of open rebellion through beautiful creation. No, we're in the ideation phase. So if we're talking about again evil as it is presented to us in three-dimensional reality, right? We're at least 2,000 years behind, right? Because guess what they've done? They've already done the ideation. They've already done their little communes. They've already done their secret societies. They've already done their systemic oppressions and their programs, right? They've already created their islands, right? They've already gone through all of these processes that we're just now understanding. Like, hey, wait a second. Actually, like, look at Earth. It's a miraculous wonder with infinite resource and self-healing properties where you could basically establish heavenly life. Like it could be like a heaven on earth. Like life on earth could be immensely more beautiful. Immensely. Just imagine the capacity we have as a species to form that type of living, right? But it's not. So again, you need to create little windows or little portals. And you can only do that if you follow this cosmic law. You can only achieve that, my friends, if you follow this cosmic law. If you go out there and fight fire with fire, everyone's going to get burnt, including you. I'm not saying it's the wrong thing to do, okay? Because as an individual, you're righteously angry and you want to see aggressive change. But there is also another position, to a philosophical position or standpoint, to uncover here and to understand. And that is, if I start building a system today that in 10 or 15 years will hold the capacity to make the current system obsolete, I should probably be doing that instead of the other thing. Because that way you're divinely protected. That way evil has no ability to directly touch anything you do. That's why it has to deceive. That's why it has to plant doubt to penetrate the divine protection, because divine protection cannot be penetrated. You can only be brought out of divine protection. Divine protection cannot be penetrated by darkness. Only if you step outside of it willingly, voluntarily, then you become, someone who can be oppressed and attacked and potentially destroyed, right? So again, this is why the first temples were built. This is why the first awakened and enlightened societies were formed, right? This is why. Because they are impervious to the designs of evil. Again, these are not forces who, like, for example, these are not ignorant and blind forces who are unaware that evil exists, who are unaware that temptation and deceit exist. No, 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 no. These are societies, these are people who are highly awakened, who understand that these things exist, but choose to not oppress these things directly, but rather create alternative means through which life can be experienced and attract more power, more attention, more influence, more quantum reality and quantum density to these new things. The more people you have co creating what you're doing, the more influential your imprint becomes on this world. And the more influential your imprint is, right, the more intense its effects. So that's why coming together in unity is such a big element. And sharing a higher ideal and a higher moral is such a big element. For example, what can, for all its faults, what can a religious movement based on higher ideals and gentleness and righteousness can accomplish? Well, it can take you and me. We have nothing in common. We're not from the same place. We're not of the same skin color. We're completely different. You're a different species from me. Well, it can take you and it can take me and it can unite us under the banner. It can give us a new commonality through which we can envision a better existence for us both. Even if we hold no loyalty to one another whatsoever. This is why an idea or an ideological movement is so dangerous to evil, because evil thrives when things are fragmented, when people are isolated, when the family unit is cheapened and it's not strong. So like, now I can come and, like, yeah, I can peer into the private life of one of your family members, someone who's very impressionable or vulnerable or weak, and they have no strong support circle, and I can deceive them into doing things that I want them to be doing, right? This is how evil functions. Again, people who step out of divine protection are usually the ones who are victimized by by this thing. But that also doesn't mean that they can't come back into the fold, right? It's not a hopeless ordeal, so to speak, right? It's a decision. The moment you intently change how you move in this life. So if you say, you know what, I opposed this and this and this in an aggressive manner before, but now I've gained the wisdom to understand that there is a better and more effective way that achieves the same outcome, if not better, right? If the moment I step into that new lifestyle is the moment that I'm immediately divinely protected again, nothing can touch me and nothing can touch you because you're well intentioned. So that's the big secret, right? That's why there's a snake in the garden. Get it? That's why it has to be there. That's why it has to be an intellectual, like a metaphorically and symbolically, an intellectual being, a very cunning presence who will convince you to step out of your divine protection, right? So that's the most important cosmic law. This is why if you look at like secret societies and like whatever you want to call them, whatever, they have to resort to deception because um you can't directly go and oppress because if you do, you're going to be destroyed within this lifetime. You're going to inherit great suffering within this lifetime. If you tempt and deceive, right? Like I said, the punch effect, it takes longer for the effects of that to play out within time, and it takes longer for the feedback loop to come back to you. And because it takes longer, sometimes the result of that is inherited either later on in life or it's inherited beyond life, which is also an incredibly bad deal, by the way. It's an incredibly bad deal. It's the one of the worst deals you can make ever, period, because you are buying off a I don't even know, like a fake pocket of time, and on the other side of that deal is forever. It's timelessness, right? But we'll get to that in another conversation. Anyway, like to finish this thing off, this is supposed to be a quick discussion. Um, think on this concept. I always say have 100 friends, right? In the times that are coming, you are going to need people around you who share these same ideals, who also want to build and who also want to empower, right? The moment you have, 100 is a very divine number, right? When you have 100 people working towards something, nothing that there exists, nothing that cannot be achieved as soon as you have 100 people working towards it. Like it's that threshold between something that is so personal and individual. So a personal effect. For example, if you have a ritual of nine, right, and out of 9 people, there's a single person that is the object of that ritual. The effect of that ritual will be concentrated on that individual. So the effect is always individual, right? So individuals can only affect individuals on a quantum level. Now, if you have more than 10 people, right, up to 99 affecting something on a quantum level, let's say in a ritualistic or formulaic manner, then you can affect meso systems. So you can affect a group. So you can affect a a family, or you can affect closely tied elements, like several elements, because it's just the energetic charge supports that much. But and the moment you go beyond 100, you can affect the consensus. The moment you go beyond 100 people, you can affect the consensus reality. At least intuitively, this is how I know it to be true, right? Um, Again, there's space for interpretation because you receive this stuff not it's like written in a notebook, right? You're shown this through imagery, through thought forms and visions. So this is how I know it, and intuitively I feel that this is so. um to understand why this becomes important now, especially with where the world is going, it's going to go in direct opposition. You're going to see a lot of conflict. You're going to see um, physical expression of that conflict. It's going to be a very physical thing to experience. The wise men of today, right? They don't look at the world and they don't see the masses as ready or primed. And whenever I talk to my friends who are spiritually involved, I would always tell them, "Hey, like I'm not pessimistic, but I think you're wrong on your assessment that you're going through a global awakening." And they would always tell me, "But yeah, but there's so many people that are awakening, and like they have these, I'm saying no, like a very large portion of the world is blind and easily corrupt. And I didn't want to be correct on this assessment, by the way. But as it's become evident, I am. The wise men of today don't see the world as primed in terms of like they can't just come out and say this is the right thing to do. Let's come out and do it. Let's demand that higher standard. Let's demand that change. Let's do this and this. Let's be righteous. Let's be idealists. Let's be morally aligned with divinity. We don't see that. The wise men of today look into, again, I always say this, 10 or 15 years in the future, in the hopeful future. That's where they plan. That's where they dwell. Because what you build today, right, will serve as the platform or the fundament for this change to occur hopefully 10 or 15 years in the future, because it's unable to occur today. Again, people are too weak. They're too scattered. They're too isolated. They're too. Just look at the religions of the world. Uh, minus Christianity, the wing of the Christianity that isn't completely corrupt and invaded, which is most of it. So minus the non-corrupt wing of Christianity, just look at the state of the world. Um, War, domination, conquering, war, domination, conquering, war, domination, conquering. It's an endless ocean of just lost souls. Like you can even hear the souls of these people as they're like just yelling and screaming and screeching, trying to claw their way out of their own bodies. That's how ill many of us are today, at least in this current timeline. So, in a world like this where 90 or 95% are still slaves to their animalistic sides, you're not going to get a global shift. But what you will get is holy places. Like I say, make your home a beautiful place. That's the start. That's your personal temple. And what is beyond that is the communal temple. And again, this doesn't come into opposition like we talked about. It shouldn't come with opposition with any sort of established religious belief. You do not want to create religious zealotry or a religious movement. You want to create a philosophical movement. There's a big difference between these things, because a philosophy is welcoming, universally welcoming. You can have a Christian sit down and you can have like a Muslim sit down and philosophize and share a philosophy, right? But if you're opposing that which they identify with, they can no longer do that. So it's also important to understand that. Um, so who I have around me, for example, with what we've been able to build here, which is a very loose formation of distant friendships, right? That is enough to form a coherent ideal, which is currently slowly being formed, to then make it a universal thing that others can pursue without invitation. right? So if you like the idea of what I'm building, right, then you can join in on the idea, you can join in on the philosophy, and the moment you share the moral values and the intentions of that philosophy, right, and these things still have to be documented, by the way, they're not, again, it's just like hearsay among friends, right? Then you can go and pursue that on your own and see where that takes you. And the moment you pursue that on your own, you might become an exemplary person for someone else. So you might become a window for someone else where and through you, they'll be able to quantum leap into a new state of being. And the moment they do that, they also become a window for someone else. And then those become a window and so on and so forth. That's what you want to build. You want to build a movement that gets so much natural traction and is a self-empowering thing that it makes everything else just obsolete. If I can exist on a beautiful plane where I can trust my neighbors, right? Um I can be authentic and genuine in my expression, right? I can go and practice gentleness and care and be surrounded by beautiful things, beautiful art, beautiful music, right? If I can exist in a state like this, but not in ignorance, like we say, but in strength as well, then of course I would choose to exist in this sort of place. Why would I choose to exist in society today, which is corrupt and ruined and maybe even irreparably spoiled and rotten from the core, right? So what we're building right now is what we're building an alternative. So that's why building is the best way to oppose the darkness and not destruction, because you're stepping into an arena against something that's more experienced in destruction. It has far more resources than you do. It has far more. It is a larger capacity for violence than you do. Actually, no, I take that back. Not for violence, but for like aimless, like stupid, ignorant violence, right? Because righteousness has more capacity for violence, I would argue, than non-righteousness, right? In the face of, I don't know, Archangel Michael or Saint George driving the spear of truth through its throat, right? That's inspirational to me personally. So again, it's a movement, my friends. It's a movement. It's a quiet movement, but it's a movement. And how you become part of it is not by following it, but embodying it and embracing it and understanding that your personal creation of beauty or your personal involvement in beautifying the communities and the space you are part of, and this space is increasingly growing, you add to its power, you add to its influence, and you add to its capacity to house angelic energies so that you and everyone within it can become divinely protected. Individually, you already are divinely protected if you follow this rule, this cosmic rule we talked about today. But on a communal level, right? For this movement to survive in the consensus reality, right? It requires growth. So think on that. Much love.